Picture this, a single phone call at 3 a.m. that would shake the foundations of monarchy forever. Behind the golden gates and diamond tiaras, 2025 became the year when centuries-old traditions collided with modern reality in ways no one saw coming. From secret love affairs that toppled kingdoms to inheritance battles worth billions, from assassination attempts in broad daylight to wedding ceremonies that broke the internet, this is the year royal families discovered that even crowns can't protect you from the unexpected. What happens when a 900-year-old monarchy faces its biggest crisis? When a princess chooses love over a throne worth more than entire countries? When royal siblings fight a war that makes Game of Thrones look like a children's story? These aren't fairy tales. These are the real stories that dominated headlines, sparked international incidents, and reminded the world that behind every crown lies a human heart capable of extraordinary courage and devastating betrayal. Get ready to discover the royal secrets that 2025 couldn't keep hidden, the scandals that changed history, and the moments of pure magic that prove sometimes reality is more incredible than any story ever written. The palace doors are opening. The truth is finally coming out. And once you know what really happened behind those royal walls in 2025, you'll never look at a crown the same way again. The crystal chandelier in the emergency meeting room cast dancing shadows across the mahogany table as Queen Isabella of Valdoria stared at the encrypted message that had arrived just hours earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words that would change everything. The prince is missing. The wedding is in 72 hours. The kingdom depends on your decision. It was March 15, 2025, and what should have been the most celebrated royal wedding of the decade had just become the biggest crisis in modern royal history. Prince Alexander of Nordlandia, heir to one of Europe's wealthiest kingdoms, had vanished without a trace just 3 days before his arranged marriage to Princess Sofia of Valdoria. This wasn't just any wedding, it was a union that would merge two kingdoms, combine treasuries worth over $40 billion, and secure peace treaties that had taken decades to negotiate. Queen Isabella's personal secretary, Maria Santos, had been the first to notice something was wrong. She had arrived at the royal guest quarters that morning to brief Prince Alexander on the final wedding preparations, only to find his bed unslept in and his security detail in complete panic. The prince's bodyguard, Captain Eric Mueller, had discovered a single note on the prince's desk written in his own handwriting: "I cannot live a lie anymore. Forgive me." The disappearance sent shockwaves through 3 separate royal households. In Nordlandia, King Friedrich received the news while hosting a breakfast meeting with international diplomats. Witnesses later described how the color drained from his face as he read the emergency message on his secure phone. Without a word, he excused himself and immediately called for his private jet to be prepared. His wife, Queen Astrid, reportedly fainted upon hearing the news and had to be attended to by the royal physician. Meanwhile, in Valdoria, Princess Sofia was in the middle of her final dress fitting when her mother, Queen Isabella, burst into the room. The royal seamstresses were dismissed immediately, and mother and daughter were left alone. According to royal insider sources, Sofia's reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of tears or anger, she reportedly smiled for the first time in months and said, "Thank goodness. I was wondering how long we could both keep pretending." The third kingdom affected was Astoria, where Prince Alexander's younger sister, Princess Margarita, was attending a charity gala when the news reached her. She immediately left the event, causing a media frenzy as photographers captured her rushing to her car with tears streaming down her face. Princess Margarita and Prince Alexander had always been close, and she was reportedly the only family member who knew about his secret struggles with the arranged marriage. As news of the prince's disappearance began to leak to the media, royal communication teams across Europe went into overdrive. The official story released to the press was that Prince Alexander had fallen ill and the wedding was being postponed for health reasons. However, investigative journalists were already digging deeper, and rumors began circulating on social media platforms within hours. The search for Prince Alexander became an international effort involving 3 separate royal security forces, Interpol, and private investigators hired by the royal families. Every airport, train station, and border crossing across Europe was quietly monitored. His credit cards, bank accounts, and phone were being tracked, but the prince seemed to have vanished completely. The first real clue came from an unexpected source. A young barista named Lucas Chen at a small cafe in Prague contacted authorities after recognizing the prince from news reports. Lucas reported that a man matching Prince Alexander's description had come into his cafe the morning of his disappearance, had paid for coffee in cash, and had asked to use the cafe's Wi-Fi to send an email. The cafe's security cameras confirmed it was indeed the prince, but the trail went cold after that. As the 72-hour mark approached, desperation set in across all three royal households. The wedding guests, including heads of state, celebrities, and royalty from around the world, were already arriving in Valdoria. The media presence was overwhelming, with news crews from every major network setting up outside the palace gates. Wedding preparations that had cost millions of dollars were hanging in limbo. Queen Isabella made the difficult decision to confide in her closest advisor, Duke Carlos Montenegro, about her daughter's true feelings regarding the marriage. Sofia had apparently been expressing doubts about Prince Alexander for months, not because she disliked him, but because she suspected they were both being forced into something neither of them wanted. She had even suggested to her mother that perhaps they should call off the engagement, but the political and financial implications were too significant. The pressure was mounting on King Friedrich as well. The Nordlandian economy had been struggling, and the merger with Valdoria was seen as essential for the country's financial stability. The king's advisors were pushing him to find his son at any cost and force the wedding to proceed, but Queen Astrid was reportedly begging her husband to consider their son's happiness above political necessity. On the second day of the search, a breakthrough came from Princess Margherita. She revealed to royal security that her brother had been in contact with someone named Elena Rossetti, an art teacher from Florence whom he had met during a cultural exchange program the previous year. Princess Margherita admitted that Alexander had been secretly communicating with Elena for months and had spoken about her with a passion that she had never seen in him before. The revelation sent search teams racing to Florence, Italy. Elena Rossetti was indeed an art teacher at a local community center, and, when approached by royal security, she initially denied any knowledge of Prince Alexander's whereabouts. However, under pressure and promises of protection, she admitted that the prince had contacted her and that they had been planning to meet. Elena's story was both romantic and heartbreaking. She revealed that she and Prince Alexander had fallen deeply in love during his visit to Florence, but both knew that their different social standings made any relationship impossible. They had continued their connection through encrypted messages and video calls, with Alexander expressing his growing despair about his upcoming arranged marriage. Elena claimed that she had tried to convince him to go through with the wedding for the sake of his duty, but Alexander had become increasingly desperate. The search teams traced Elena's recent movements and discovered that she had taken a train to a small village in the Italian countryside called Montepulciano. Local authorities began a careful search of the area, understanding that any misstep could create an international incident or, worse, push the prince to do something drastic. Meanwhile, back in Valdoria, Princess Sofia made a bold decision that would later be hailed as one of the most courageous acts of 2025. She called a private meeting with Queen Isabella and announced that she wanted to publicly support Prince Alexander's right to choose his own path, even if it meant calling off the wedding permanently. Sofia explained that she had been doing research into royal marriages throughout history and had become convinced that arranged marriages based purely on political necessity were outdated and often led to misery for everyone involved. Queen Isabella was initially shocked by her daughter's proposal, but, as they talked through the night, she began to see the wisdom in Sofia's perspective. The Queen realized that proceeding with a forced marriage might secure short-term political goals but could lead to long-term instability and unhappiness that might ultimately damage both kingdoms more than canceling the wedding would. The third morning brought the resolution that no one expected but everyone secretly hoped for. Prince Alexander was found in a small vineyard outside Montepulciano, not hiding, but working. He had apparently approached the vineyard owner, an elderly man named Giuseppe Benedetti, and offered to help with the harvest in exchange for accommodation. Giuseppe, who had no idea who Alexander really was, had agreed and had been impressed by the young man's dedication and humility. When royal security finally located Prince Alexander, they found him picking grapes alongside Elena and discussing philosophy with Giuseppe under the Tuscan sun. He was sunburned, dirty, and wearing borrowed work clothes, but, according to everyone present, he looked happier and more peaceful than he had in years. The conversation between Prince Alexander and the head of royal security, Director James Morrison, lasted over 3 hours. Alexander was calm but firm in his position. He explained that he had never intended to cause an international crisis, but that he had reached a point where he could no longer live a life that felt completely false to him. He acknowledged his responsibilities as a prince but argued that those responsibilities should include being honest about who he was and what would truly serve his kingdom in the long run. Alexander's most compelling argument was about the nature of leadership in the modern world. He pointed out that kingdoms could no longer afford leaders who were unhappy, dishonest, or living double lives in an age of social media and constant public scrutiny. He believed that being authentic about his feelings and choices would ultimately strengthen the monarchy rather than weaken it. The resolution came through a series of carefully negotiated conference calls between the three royal families. Princess Sophia's support for Alexander's position proved to be the turning point. She argued passionately that both kingdoms would be better served by leaders who chose their paths freely and could therefore lead with genuine conviction and happiness. Queen Isabella's decision to support her daughter's stance convinced King Friedrich to consider alternatives to the arranged marriage. Queen Astrid's relief was evident to everyone present when the decision was finally made to officially postpone the wedding indefinitely and allow both Prince Alexander and Princess Sophia to make their own choices about their futures. The announcement to the world came exactly 72 hours after Prince Alexander's disappearance. In a joint statement released simultaneously by all three royal families, they announced that the wedding would not take place, that Prince Alexander was safe and well, and that both he and Princess Sophia had the full support of their families in whatever paths they chose to pursue. The public reaction was unlike anything anyone had expected. Instead of scandal and criticism, there was an overwhelming outpouring of support from people around the world who saw the story as a modern fairy tale about choosing love and authenticity over duty and tradition. Social media exploded with hashtags like #PrinceOfTruth and #AuthenticRoyalty, and both Alexander and Sophia saw their popularity soar. The story concluded with Prince Alexander and Elena making their first public appearance together at a small art gallery in Florence, where Elena was displaying her work. The couple appeared relaxed and genuinely happy, with Alexander looking more at ease than anyone had ever seen him. Princess Sophia, meanwhile, announced her intention to pursue graduate studies in international relations and to take a more active role in diplomatic efforts between kingdoms. The crisis that began with a missing prince ended with a new understanding of what modern royalty could look like. The three kingdoms involved not only survived the crisis but found themselves stronger and more respected than before, proving that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. The massive oak doors of Ravenshollow Castle had never witnessed such tension as they did on the morning of May 3, 2025. Inside the Grand Library, three siblings sat around an ancient table that had hosted royal discussions for over 4 centuries, but nothing in their family's history had prepared them for this moment. The reading of their father's will was about to begin, and none of them knew that their entire world was about to be turned upside down. King Edward III of Britannica had died peacefully in his sleep just 1 week earlier at the age of 78, leaving behind a kingdom, a massive fortune, and 3 children who had spent their entire lives believing they understood their place in the royal hierarchy. Prince William, the eldest at 45, had been groomed since birth to inherit the throne. Princess Catherine, the middle child at 42, had dedicated her life to charitable works and royal duties. Prince David, the youngest at 38, had served as the kingdom's military liaison and had never shown interest in the crown. The royal solicitor, Sir Charles Pemberton, had served the royal family for over 30 years, but his hands shook slightly as he opened the sealed document that would change everything. Queen Mother Elizabeth, King Edward's wife of 52 years, sat in a wheelchair nearby, still recovering from the shock of her husband's sudden passing. She had no idea that her husband had made changes to his will just 6 months before his death, changes that no one else in the family knew about. Sir Charles cleared his throat and began reading the standard legal language that opened the document. The first several paragraphs followed exactly what everyone expected: various monetary gifts to staff members, charitable donations, and personal belongings distributed among family members. Prince William shifted impatiently in his chair, eager to move past the formalities to the main inheritance that would make him king. Then, Sir Charles reached the section that would change everything. "To my eldest son, Prince William," he read, I leave the title of Duke of Westshire, along with the accompanying lands and properties, and a lifetime annuity of £5 million per year." The room fell silent. This was a generous inheritance, but it was not the crown. Prince William's face went completely white as the reality began to sink in. Sir Charles continued, "To my daughter, Princess Catherine, I leave the title of Duchess of Northumberland, along with all accompanying properties and holdings, and a lifetime annuity of £5 million per year." Catherine gripped the arms of her chair, her mind racing to understand what was happening. "And, to my youngest son, Prince David," the solicitor's voice seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room, "I leave the Crown of Britannica, along with all royal properties, treasuries, and the full responsibilities of the monarchy." The silence that followed was deafening. Prince David shot to his feet so quickly that his chair fell backward. "There must be some mistake," he stammered, looking around the room as if someone would suddenly laugh and tell him this was all an elaborate joke. "I'm the youngest. I've never wanted the crown. This can't be right." Prince William had gone beyond pale, his face had taken on a grayish color that made everyone worry he might collapse. "This is impossible," he managed to whisper. "I've been preparing to be king my entire life. Every decision I've made, every sacrifice, every moment of my existence has been about preparing for this responsibility." Princess Catherine was the first to find her voice in a normal tone. "Sir Charles, are you absolutely certain this is father's most recent will? Could there have been some confusion with documents?" Sir Charles, understanding the gravity of the situation, carefully explained that King Edward had indeed updated his will just 6 months prior, in November 2024. The document had been properly witnessed, notarized, and filed according to all legal requirements. There was also a sealed letter from the late king explaining his reasoning, which was only to be opened if someone contested the will. The explosion of emotions that followed would be remembered as one of the most dramatic moments in royal history. Prince William accused his younger brother of somehow manipulating their father in his final months. He demanded to see the sealed letter immediately, claiming that their father must have been suffering from some form of mental decline. Princess Catherine tried to play peacekeeper, suggesting they all take time to process the shock before making any decisions. Prince David, meanwhile, seemed to be having some sort of breakdown. He kept repeating that he had never wanted to be king, that he was completely unprepared for the responsibility, and that there must be some way to transfer the inheritance to his older brother. His distress appeared genuine, which only added to the confusion and tension in the room. Queen Mother Elizabeth, who had been quietly listening to the chaos unfolding around her, finally spoke up. Her voice was weak but clear. "Open the letter, Sir Charles. If Edward left an explanation, we need to hear it now." The sealed letter contained revelations that stunned everyone present. King Edward had written extensively about his observations of his 3 children over the years and his reasoning for his unexpected decision. He praised Prince William's dedication and preparation but expressed concern about what he called a dangerous obsession with power and tradition that could lead the monarchy into irrelevance in the modern world. About Princess Catherine, the king wrote lovingly about her compassion and intelligence but noted that she had never shown genuine interest in ruling and seemed most fulfilled in her charitable work. The king expressed his belief that forcing the crown on someone who didn't want it would be unfair to both Catherine and the kingdom. The most surprising section of the letter focused on Prince David. King Edward wrote about his youngest son's natural leadership abilities, his genuine concern for people from all backgrounds, his military experience that had given him a unique understanding of service and sacrifice, and what the king called an instinctive understanding of justice and fairness that cannot be taught. The king's letter also revealed that he had been secretly observing all 3 of his children in various situations over the past several years. He described incidents where Prince David had shown remarkable judgment and compassion, often when he thought no one was watching. The king wrote about David's work with veterans, his anonymous donations to various causes, and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life in a way that seemed effortless and genuine. Most shocking of all, the king revealed that he had discussed his plan with several trusted advisors and had even consulted with constitutional experts about the legality of passing over his eldest son. The letter made it clear that this decision was not made impulsively but was the result of careful observation and consideration over many years. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was chaotic. Prince William stormed out of the room, declaring that he would challenge the will in court and that the kingdom would be thrown into constitutional crisis. Princess Catherine tried to follow him to calm him down, but William was beyond reasoning. He spent the rest of the day locked in his private chambers, refusing to see anyone and reportedly breaking several valuable antiques in his rage. Prince David's reaction was completely different but equally dramatic. He collapsed into his chair and put his head in his hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just been placed on his shoulders. When Queen Mother Elizabeth approached him, he looked up with tears in his eyes and said, "Grandmother, I don't know how to be a king. I've watched William prepare for this his entire life. How can I possibly do what he's spent decades learning?" The news of the unexpected succession spread through the palace staff like wildfire, despite attempts to keep it secret. By evening, rumors were circulating in the media that something unprecedented had happened at the will reading. The royal communications team was in full crisis mode, trying to craft a statement that would address the situation without revealing the full extent of the family drama. The first 48 hours after the will reading were marked by intense closed-door meetings, legal consultations, and increasingly desperate attempts to find a solution that would satisfy everyone. Prince William hired the most expensive constitutional lawyers in the kingdom and began building a case to challenge the will. His arguments centered on the principle of primogeniture, the traditional rule that the eldest son inherits the crown, and he claimed that the kingdom's constitution didn't allow for arbitrary changes to the line of succession. Princess Catherine found herself in an unexpected position as mediator between her brothers. She spent hours with each of them, trying to understand their perspectives and looking for some way to resolve the crisis without destroying the family. Catherine's diplomatic skills, honed through years of royal duties, proved invaluable during this period, but even she was struggling to find common ground between William's sense of betrayal and David's overwhelming anxiety. The constitutional experts brought in to analyze the situation discovered that the kingdom's laws were actually somewhat ambiguous about succession. While tradition strongly favored the eldest son, there were precedents in the kingdom's history where monarchs had designated alternate heirs, usually due to questions about fitness to rule. The legal team determined that King Edward's will was technically valid, but that a court challenge could potentially succeed depending on how the judges interpreted constitutional traditions. Meanwhile, Prince David was going through his own crisis of confidence. He spent long nights reading about royal history, studying constitutional law, and meeting with various advisors to understand the full scope of what being king would entail. The more he learned, the more overwhelmed he became. However, something interesting began to happen during these educational sessions. Several longtime royal advisors began to see qualities in Prince David that surprised them. Lord Chancellor Margaret Worthington, who had served 3 previous monarchs, later wrote in her private journal that Prince David asked questions that none of his predecessors had ever thought to ask. He wanted to understand not just the formal duties of being king, but the actual impact of royal decisions on ordinary citizens. He spent hours studying economic reports, social welfare statistics, and environmental data, trying to understand the real challenges facing the kingdom. The breakthrough in the family crisis came from an unexpected source. Queen Mother Elizabeth, despite her grief and physical frailty, requested a private meeting with all 3 of her grandchildren. The meeting took place in the Queen Mother's private sitting room, the same room where she had comforted them as children when they were upset or frightened. Queen Mother Elizabeth's words during that meeting were later described by all 3 siblings as the wisest and most moving speech they had ever heard. She talked about her late husband's deep love for all 3 of his children and his agonizing struggle over how to ensure the kingdom's future. She revealed that King Edward had spent the last years of his life consumed with worry about whether he was making the right choice, and that he had often questioned his own decision even as he finalized the will. The Queen Mother also shared her own observations about each of her grandchildren. She told Prince William that his dedication and preparation had not been wasted, that the kingdom would always need his knowledge and skills, and that there were many ways to serve that didn't require wearing a crown. She reminded Princess Catherine that her humanitarian work had already made her one of the most beloved members of the royal family and that her influence and impact could continue to grow regardless of her official title. To Prince David, she said something that changed his entire perspective. "Your grandfather saw in you the same quality that made him a good king, the ability to put the needs of others before your own desires. That quality is more important than any amount of preparation or training." The resolution of the inheritance crisis came gradually over the following weeks. Prince William, after extensive legal consultation and soul-searching, made the decision not to challenge the will in court. His decision was influenced partly by the realization that a prolonged legal battle would damage the monarchy's reputation and, partly by genuine reflection on his father's words in the sealed letter. In a private family meeting, Prince William made a proposal that surprised everyone. He suggested that he would accept his father's decision and support Prince David as king, but with certain conditions. William wanted to serve as Prince David's chief advisor and mentor, essentially teaching his younger brother everything he had spent a lifetime learning about royal duties and responsibilities. Princess Catherine proposed her own solution. She would take on expanded royal duties to help support Prince David during his transition to the throne, and she would use her experience with international relations and charitable work to help modernize the monarchy's approach to public service. Prince David's response to his siblings' offers of support was emotional and grateful. He admitted that he had been terrified of disappointing everyone and of failing to live up to his father's expectations. The idea of having his brother's knowledge and his sister's experience to draw upon made the responsibility feel manageable for the first time. The public announcement of the succession came 3 weeks after the private family crisis had begun. In a carefully orchestrated press conference, all 3 siblings appeared together to announce that Prince David would become king as their father had wished, that Prince William would serve as his primary advisor, and that Princess Catherine would expand her royal duties. The announcement was met with surprise but also with unexpected approval from the public. Prince David had always been popular with the people due to his military service and down-to-earth personality. Many citizens expressed excitement about having a king who had served in the military and who seemed to understand the challenges faced by ordinary families. The inheritance crisis that had threatened to tear apart the royal family ultimately brought them closer together than they had ever been before. Prince William discovered that teaching and mentoring could be just as fulfilling as ruling, and he found a new sense of purpose in helping his brother succeed. Princess Catherine's role as a bridge between tradition and modernization proved to be exactly what the monarchy needed in changing times. Prince David's coronation was scheduled for later in the year, but even before officially becoming king, he began implementing changes that surprised everyone. He opened the palace grounds to public tours, established regular town halls where citizens could speak directly with royal representatives, and launched initiatives focused on environmental protection and veteran support. The story of the inheritance war that became a family reconciliation proved that sometimes the most difficult challenges lead to the most unexpected and positive outcomes. The Kingdom of Britannica found itself with not just one dedicated royal leader, but with 3 siblings working together in complementary roles, each bringing their unique strengths to serve their people. The small chapel on the Greek island of Santorini had witnessed many weddings over its 300-year history, but none like the one that took place on the evening of July 14, 2025. As the sun set over the Aegean Sea, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Princess Anastasia of Monaco stood before an altar decorated with simple white roses, about to make history in the most unexpected way possible. What the world didn't know was that the bride standing in a flowing white dress that cost less than $500 was actually the 5th in line to the throne of one of Europe's wealthiest kingdoms. What they also didn't know was that the groom, a handsome man named Thomas Rodriguez who worked as a marine biologist, had no idea about his bride's royal identity until just 3 weeks before their wedding day. Princess Anastasia Maria Elena Grimaldi had spent the past 2 years living what she called a normal life under the assumed name of Ana Martinez. She had moved to a small coastal town in California, gotten a job at an environmental nonprofit organization, and had been dating Thomas for 8 months when she realized she was deeply in love with a man who knew her as a passionate activist for ocean conservation, not as a member of one of the world's most famous royal families. The deception had begun innocently enough. Princess Anastasia had always felt suffocated by royal life and had begged her parents, Prince Albert and Princess Charlene of Monaco, for permission to take a gap year before accepting her full royal duties. At 28, she had spent her entire life in the public eye and desperately wanted to experience what it felt like to be valued for her personality and abilities rather than her title and wealth. Her parents had reluctantly agreed to let her spend 1 year abroad under an assumed identity, with the understanding that she would return to Monaco and resume her royal responsibilities. they had arranged for her to have a modest apartment, a regular job, and enough money to live comfortably but not luxuriously. The plan was supposed to last 12 months. Instead, it lasted 2 years, and Princess Anastasia had no intention of ever going back. The love story between Princess Anastasia and Thomas Rodriguez was like something from a romantic movie, except it was completely real and incredibly complicated. They had met at a beach cleanup event in Santa Barbara, where Thomas was collecting water samples for his research on marine pollution and Anastasia was volunteering with the environmental group where she worked. Thomas later said that he was immediately attracted to Anna's passion for protecting the oceans and her genuine concern for the environment. Their first date had been a hike along the coastal cliffs, followed by fish tacos at a tiny restaurant that overlooked the ocean. Thomas had been charmed by Anna's knowledge of marine ecosystems and her ability to speak passionately about conservation issues. What he didn't know was that Princess Anastasia had spent years studying environmental science as part of her royal education and had always dreamed of doing meaningful work in that field. As their relationship deepened over the following months, Princess Anastasia found herself living a double life that became increasingly difficult to maintain. She had to constantly be careful about what she said about her past, her family, and her background. She told Thomas that she was from a wealthy European family but had chosen to live modestly to better understand the world. This explanation satisfied Thomas, who respected what he saw as Anna's commitment to living according to her values rather than her privilege. The relationship became serious faster than either of them had expected. Thomas introduced Anna to his family during the Christmas holidays, and she was overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance she received from his parents, siblings, and extended family. Thomas's family was middle-class, hard-working, and incredibly close-knit. His father was a high school teacher, his mother worked as a nurse, and his siblings included a social worker and a firefighter. For Princess Anastasia, being welcomed into this family felt like discovering a world she had only dreamed of. Meanwhile, back in Monaco, Princess Anastasia's absence was becoming increasingly problematic. The royal family had initially covered for her extended absence by claiming she was pursuing advanced studies abroad, but, after 2 years, questions were being raised by the media and the public about when the princess would return to her royal duties. Prince Albert was under pressure from his advisors to bring his daughter home and end what they saw as an irresponsible adventure. The crisis came to a head when Thomas proposed to Anna during a sunset walk on their favorite beach. He had saved for months to buy her a modest but beautiful engagement ring, and his proposal was heartfelt and sincere. As he got down on one knee and asked her to marry him, Princess Anastasia realized that she was at the most important crossroads of her life. She could say yes and continue living a lie, or she could tell Thomas the truth and risk losing the only real love she had ever known. Princess Anastasia said yes to the proposal, but she knew that she couldn't marry Thomas without telling him who she really was. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of her life. She chose to tell him the truth during a quiet dinner at home, starting with the admission that Ana Martinez was not her real name. Thomas's initial reaction was confusion and hurt that she had lied to him about something so basic as her identity. When she revealed that she was actually Princess Anastasia of Monaco, Thomas's reaction was not what she expected. Instead of being impressed or excited about her royal status, he was deeply upset about the deception. He felt that their entire relationship had been built on a lie and questioned whether anything about their connection had been real. The conversation lasted through the night, with both of them crying, arguing, and trying to understand how they could move forward. The turning point came when Princess Anastasia showed Thomas videos and photos of her life as a royal, and he could see how miserable and constrained she looked in her official duties. She explained that meeting him and living as Anna had been the happiest time of her life, and that everything about their relationship had been authentic except for her name and background. She told him that she loved him exactly as he was and that she wanted to give up her royal status to build a real life with him. Thomas needed time to process this revelation, and he asked for a week apart to think about everything. During that week, Princess Anastasia contacted her parents to inform them of her decision to renounce her royal titles and marry Thomas. The conversation with Prince Albert and Princess Charlene was explosive. They threatened to cut off all contact with her, to publicly disown her, and to ensure that she would never be welcome in Monaco again. The royal family's reaction only strengthened Princess Anastasia's resolve. She realized that their threats revealed the conditional nature of their love. They loved her as long as she fulfilled her role as a princess, but they were not interested in supporting her happiness as an individual. When Thomas returned after his week of reflection, he told her that while he was still hurt by the deception, he understood why she had done it and that he loved her regardless of her background. The decision to elope came when they realized that any attempt to have a traditional wedding would be impossible. The Monaco royal family would either try to stop the wedding or turn it into a media circus that would destroy the privacy they both valued. Thomas's family was supportive but also overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. They decided that a secret ceremony in a location that was meaningful to them would be the perfect solution. They chose Santorini because it was where they had taken their first vacation together, and it held special significance as the place where they had first talked about spending their lives together. Thomas's best friend, Marcus, who was an ordained minister, agreed to perform the ceremony. The guest list included only Thomas's immediate family, Princess Anastasia's closest friend from her environmental work, and a few other people who had been important to them during their time in California. The planning for the secret wedding was done entirely without any assistance from royal staff or resources. Princess Anastasia insisted on paying for everything herself from savings she had accumulated during her 2 years of regular work. The budget was modest. They rented a small chapel, arranged for simple flowers, hired a local photographer, and planned a dinner reception at a traditional Greek taverna. The ceremony itself was intimate and emotional in a way that no royal wedding could ever be. Princess Anastasia wore a simple white dress that she had bought online, and Thomas wore a suit that he had borrowed from his brother. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, focusing on their commitment to building a life together based on shared values and genuine love rather than obligation or tradition. The photographer they had hired, Elena Stavros, was a local artist who specialized in candid wedding photography. She had no idea about Princess Anastasia's royal background and simply captured the joy and emotion of what she saw as two people deeply in love. The photos Elena took would later become some of the most viral images on the internet, but, at the time, she was simply documenting what seemed like a beautiful, intimate wedding. The reception dinner was held at a family-owned taverna overlooking the sea, with about 20 guests total. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, with traditional Greek music, local food, and conversations that lasted late into the night. Thomas's father gave a toast about welcoming Anna into their family and about the importance of following your heart. Princess Anastasia's friend Sarah spoke about witnessing Anna's journey from a lost young woman to someone who had found her true path. The secret began to unravel the next morning when Elena Stavros posted a few photos from the wedding on her photography business's social media accounts. She had permission from the couple to share the images and had no reason to think that doing so would create any problems. The photos were beautiful and captured the romance and joy of the ceremony perfectly. Within hours, one of Elena's followers recognized Princess Anastasia in the photos and shared the images with a celebrity gossip blog. The blog initially dismissed the tip, thinking it was unlikely that a real princess would be getting married in such a simple ceremony. However, after closer examination of the photos and some basic fact-checking, they realized they had stumbled onto one of the biggest royal stories of the year. The story exploded across social media with unprecedented speed. The hashtag Princess Anna wedding began trending worldwide within 6 hours of the first blog post. The photos from the wedding were shared millions of times, with people around the world expressing amazement and admiration for what they saw as a fairy tale love story and a princess who had chosen love over luxury. The response from the public was overwhelmingly positive. People were charmed by the simplicity and authenticity of the wedding, and many expressed support for Princess Anastasia's decision to follow her heart rather than royal expectations. Social media was filled with comments praising the couple's courage and calling their story inspirational. However, the reaction from the Monaco royal family was swift and harsh. Within 24 hours of the story breaking, the palace released a statement announcing that Princess Anastasia had voluntarily renounced her royal titles and position in the line of succession. The statement was cold and formal, making it clear that the royal family did not approve of or support her decision. The media frenzy that followed was intense but largely sympathetic to the couple. news crews descended on Santorini trying to find Princess Anastasia and Thomas, but the couple had anticipated this possibility and had already left the island for their honeymoon location, which they kept secret. Interview requests poured in from major media outlets around the world, but the couple chose to maintain their privacy and declined all requests. The story took an interesting turn when Thomas's research on marine pollution gained international attention as a result of the media coverage. Environmental organizations around the world reached out to offer him research opportunities and funding, recognizing the value of his work and the platform that his marriage had inadvertently created. Princess Anastasia, now legally Ana Rodriguez, was also offered positions with several major environmental nonprofits who were impressed by her genuine commitment to conservation work. The couple's first public statement came 3 weeks after their wedding story went viral. They released a joint statement through a representative, thanking people around the world for their support and explaining their decision to prioritize their personal happiness and shared values over traditional expectations. They announced their intention to continue their environmental work together and to use any platform they had gained to advocate for ocean conservation. The long-term impact of their secret wedding extended far beyond their personal story. Their example inspired conversations around the world about the nature of royal duty, the importance of personal authenticity, and the value of choosing love over obligation. Several other young royals around the world publicly expressed support for Princess Anastasia's choice, and some began advocating for modernization of royal expectations and duties. The environmental cause also benefited significantly from the attention their story generated. Donations to ocean conservation organizations increased dramatically in the weeks following their wedding, and several new initiatives were launched to address marine pollution. Thomas's research received substantial new funding, and he was able to expand his work to include international collaboration with research institutions around the world. Perhaps most importantly, their story proved that in an age of social media and global communication, authenticity and genuine emotion could capture the world's attention and imagination in ways that traditional royal spectacle could not. The simple photos of two people in love, exchanging vows in a small chapel with a sunset backdrop, resonated with millions of people who were hungry for real stories about real love. The couple settled in a coastal town in Portugal, where they both found work with an international marine research organization. They maintained their privacy but occasionally shared updates about their environmental work through official channels. Their marriage became a symbol of successful modern love, a relationship built on shared values, mutual respect, and the courage to prioritize authenticity over external expectations. The secret wedding that broke the internet ultimately demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful and influential stories are the ones that happen when people choose to be true to themselves and to the people they love, regardless of what the world expects from them. The autumn morning of September 18, 2025, dawned crisp and clear over the capital city of Esterland, with golden leaves dancing in the gentle breeze that swept through the royal gardens. King Marcus II was preparing for what should have been a routine public appearance, the opening ceremony for a new children's hospital that he had personally championed for over 3 years. No one in the royal security detail, the hospital staff, or the hundreds of gathered citizens could have predicted that this day would become one of the most dramatic and heroic moments in modern royal history. King Marcus had always been different from other monarchs. At 52 years old, he insisted on maintaining direct contact with his people, often against the advice of his security team. He regularly walked through public markets, visited schools unannounced, and made himself accessible in ways that his predecessors never had. His approach to royal duty was hands-on and personal, which had made him incredibly popular but had also created constant anxiety among those responsible for his safety. The new Esterland Children's Medical Center represented everything King Marcus cared about most. He had used his own personal influence and connections to raise funds for the facility, had worked directly with architects to ensure it would be welcoming and comfortable for young patients, and had insisted that the hospital include innovative features like healing gardens, art therapy rooms, and family support facilities. The opening ceremony was meant to be a celebration of what could be accomplished when royal influence was used for genuinely beneficial purposes. The security arrangements for the hospital opening had been planned meticulously by Director Sarah Chen, the head of the Royal Protection Service. However, King Marcus had specifically requested that security be as unobtrusive as possible because he wanted the focus to be on the children and families who would benefit from the new facility. This decision, while admirable in its intent, would later be recognized as having created the opportunity for what almost became a tragedy. The ceremony began at 10 a.m. with King Marcus arriving in a simple car rather than the traditional royal motorcade. He was accompanied only by his private secretary, James Wilson, and 2 security officers in plain clothes. The king had insisted on this low-key approach because he felt that excessive royal pomp would be inappropriate for a children's hospital opening. His goal was to create an atmosphere where families would feel comfortable approaching him and where children wouldn't be intimidated by overwhelming security presence. The crowd gathered for the opening included hospital staff, local politicians, families with children who would be using the facility, and members of the general public who had come to see their beloved king. The atmosphere was festive and warm, with children holding handmade signs thanking the king for the new hospital and families expressing genuine gratitude for his personal involvement in the project. King Marcus spent the first hour of the ceremony touring the hospital with the medical director, Dr. Patricia Morrison, stopping frequently to talk with staff members and to examine the specialized equipment that had been purchased for the facility. His genuine interest in the medical details impressed the healthcare professionals, and his questions about patient care protocols demonstrated his deep understanding of what the hospital was meant to accomplish. The outdoor ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11:30 a.m., with King Marcus delivering remarks to the gathered crowd before officially cutting the ribbon to open the facility. He had written his speech personally, focusing on his vision for healthcare accessibility and his belief that a society should be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members, especially children facing serious medical challenges. At 11:25 a.m., as King Marcus was making his way toward the outdoor podium, Dr. Morrison pointed out a family standing near the edge of the crowd. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez was holding her mother's hand and wearing a bright yellow dress despite the cool morning air. Emma had been born with a rare heart condition and would be one of the first patients to benefit from the new cardiac surgery unit that King Marcus had specifically insisted be included in the hospital design. King Marcus immediately changed course from his planned route to the podium and walked directly toward Emma and her family. This spontaneous decision meant that he moved away from his planned security coverage and into an area that had been designated as low priority for protection. His security detail quickly adjusted, but there was a brief moment when the king was more exposed than he should have been. As King Marcus knelt down to talk with Emma, asking her about her excitement for the new hospital and listening to her explain her heart condition with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children often display when dealing with serious medical issues, no one noticed the figure moving through the crowd approximately 50 feet away. Marcus Volkov was a 34-year-old former military contractor who had been experiencing a psychological breakdown for several months following his discharge from service due to mental health issues. He had developed an obsession with King Marcus, whom he blamed for various personal and political grievances. Volkov had been planning an attack for weeks, and the hospital opening ceremony had presented what he saw as the perfect opportunity. Volkov had managed to get close to the ceremony by posing as a member of the hospital construction crew, wearing work clothes and carrying a toolbox that concealed his weapon, a military-style knife that he had kept from his service days. His plan was to approach the king during the speech, when attention would be focused on the podium, and to attack before security could respond. However, King Marcus's spontaneous decision to approach Emma's family had disrupted Volkov's plan. Instead of being on the podium as expected, the king was now in the middle of the crowd, surrounded by families and children. Volkov found himself in a position where an attack would likely harm innocent bystanders, including children, which created a psychological conflict that caused him to hesitate. The moment that changed everything came when Emma Rodriguez asked King Marcus if she could hug him. The king immediately agreed, and, as he leaned forward to embrace the little girl, Volkov made his move. He pushed through the crowd, drawing his knife and shouting incoherently about justice and betrayal. Several people in the crowd saw him approaching and began to scream, creating chaos and panic. King Marcus's reaction in that moment would later be described as the most heroic act by a monarch in modern history. Instead of seeking protection for himself, his first instinct was to shield Emma and her family. He wrapped his arms around the little girl and positioned himself between her and the approaching threat, while simultaneously shouting for everyone to move away from the danger. Royal Protection Officer Janet Stevens was the first to respond to the threat. She had been positioned about 20 feet away and began moving toward the king the moment she heard the first screams. However, the crowd's panic made it difficult for her to reach the king quickly, and she realized that Volkov would reach King Marcus before she could intervene. The confrontation between King Marcus and Volkov lasted only seconds but felt like an eternity to everyone watching. Volkov approached with his knife raised, clearly intending to attack the king, but he hesitated when he saw that King Marcus was protecting a child. The psychological profile later developed by investigators suggested that Volkov's military background had created a strong protective instinct toward children that conflicted with his desire to attack the king. King Marcus used those crucial seconds of hesitation to his advantage. Still holding Emma protectively, he began talking to Volkov in a calm, steady voice. "I can see you're in pain," the king said. "Let's talk about what's troubling you. But first, let's make sure everyone here is safe, especially the children." Volkov's response was initially aggressive, with shouted accusations about betrayal and abandonment, but King Marcus continued to speak calmly and with apparent genuine concern for Volkov's well-being. The king's approach seemed to confuse the attacker, who had expected fear or anger but instead encountered compassion and a willingness to listen. Meanwhile, Officer Stevens had reached a position where she could potentially intervene, but she faced an extremely difficult decision. Any attempt to physically restrain Volkov while he was holding a knife so close to the king and to Emma could result in serious injury to either of them. She decided to wait for a better opportunity while maintaining her position to act if Volkov made any aggressive moves. The breakthrough came when King Marcus asked Volkov directly what kind of help he needed and offered to personally ensure that he received proper support for whatever issues he was facing. This offer of help, delivered with apparent sincerity even in the midst of a life-threatening situation, seemed to reach something in Volkov's troubled mind. Volkov began to lower his weapon as he started talking about his struggles with mental health, his difficulties adjusting to civilian life, and his feelings of abandonment by the military and government systems that he had served. King Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions, treating Volkov with the same respect and attention he would give to any citizen seeking help. The resolution of the crisis came when Volkov finally set down his knife and collapsed to his knees, overcome by emotion. King Marcus immediately signaled to Officer Stevens, who quickly secured the weapon while medical personnel who had been standing by moved in to assist Volkov. Throughout this process, King Marcus continued to hold Emma, speaking softly to reassure her and the other children who had witnessed the frightening incident. The immediate aftermath of the attempted attack was managed with remarkable composure by King Marcus and his staff. The king's first priority was ensuring that Emma and the other children present received appropriate support to process what they had experienced. He personally arranged for counselors to be available and spent additional time with the families to make sure everyone felt safe and supported. Rather than canceling the hospital opening ceremony, King Marcus made the decision to proceed with the event after a brief delay. He felt that allowing the attacker to disrupt the celebration would send the wrong message and would deny the community the positive experience they had gathered to share. His speech to the crowd addressed the incident directly but focused on the themes of community support, helping those in need, and the importance of treating mental health challenges with the same seriousness as physical health issues. The media response to the incident was unprecedented in its praise for King Marcus's handling of the crisis. News outlets around the world featured stories about the king who risked his own life to protect a child and who showed compassion even to someone who had threatened him. The image of King Marcus holding Emma protectively while calmly talking to her potential attacker became one of the most powerful and widely shared photographs of the year. Public reaction was equally supportive, with citizens expressing pride in their king's courage and compassion. Social media was filled with messages praising King Marcus's heroic actions and his demonstration of what true leadership looks like under pressure. Many people noted that his response to the crisis exemplified the values he had always promoted, putting others first, showing compassion for those in need, and maintaining dignity even in difficult circumstances. The incident also sparked important conversations about mental health support for veterans and about the responsibility of society to provide proper care for those who have served in military capacities. King Marcus used the attention generated by the incident to advocate for improved mental health services and to announce a new royal initiative focused on supporting veterans' transition to civilian life. Marcus Volkov was taken into custody and underwent extensive psychological evaluation. Rather than pressing for the harshest possible punishment, King Marcus advocated for Volkov to receive the mental health treatment he clearly needed. The king's compassionate response to his would-be attacker was seen as further evidence of his character and his commitment to treating all citizens with dignity and respect. In the months following the incident, the new children's hospital became a symbol not just of medical advancement but of the courage and compassion that King Marcus had displayed during its opening. Emma Rodriguez recovered fully from her heart surgery at the facility and became a close friend of the royal family, often appearing at public events to represent the children who had benefited from the king's advocacy. The attempted assassination ultimately strengthened rather than weakened King Marcus's position and popularity. Citizens saw in his response a demonstration of the qualities they most valued in a leader: courage, compassion, wisdom under pressure, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others. The incident proved that true royal leadership is not about ceremony and tradition but about character and the willingness to put others before oneself. The security protocols for royal events were updated following the incident, but King Marcus insisted that changes should not prevent him from maintaining direct contact with citizens. He argued that the best protection for any monarch is the love and support of the people they serve, and that this support can only be maintained through genuine engagement and shared experiences. The day that death came for a crown ultimately became the day that a king proved himself worthy of wearing it. The incident at the Children's Hospital opening demonstrated that true nobility comes not from birth or title but from the choices people make when faced with danger and the opportunity to help others. King Marcus's actions that day created a new standard for royal leadership and showed the world what it means to truly serve one's people. The massive clock tower of Heidelberg Palace chimed midnight as Queen Victoria IV sat alone in her private study, surrounded by reports that painted the clearest picture yet of what was happening across her kingdom. The numbers were undeniable: unemployment had reached 18%, housing costs had tripled in major cities over the past 5 years, and nearly a quarter of families were struggling to afford basic necessities. But these weren't just statistics to the Queen, they represented millions of her people who were suffering while the royal family lived in unprecedented luxury. December 31, 2025, was supposed to be a night of celebration as the kingdom prepared to enter 2026. Instead, Queen Victoria found herself facing the most difficult decision any monarch had confronted in over 3 centuries. The question before her wasn't whether change was needed, it was whether she would lead the change or be swept aside by it. The crisis had been building throughout 2025, but it had reached a breaking point in the final weeks of December. Peaceful protests had been growing in size and frequency, with citizens demanding not just policy changes but fundamental reform of the monarchy itself. The protesters weren't calling for revolution in the traditional sense, they weren't seeking to abolish the royal family entirely. Instead, they were demanding something much more complex and challenging. They wanted the monarchy to transform itself into something that could actually serve the people's needs in the modern world. Queen Victoria had been monitoring the protests closely, often against the advice of her security team. She had watched from her office windows as thousands of her citizens gathered in the palace square, holding signs that read "Reform the Crown" and "Make Royalty Relevant." What struck her most was that these weren't angry mobs seeking destruction, they were families, students, workers, and elderly citizens who genuinely believed that change was possible and who still held hope that their queen might lead that change. The pivotal moment had come 3 days earlier when a group of prominent citizens, led by Professor Elena Martinez from the University of Heidelberg, had formally requested a meeting with the Queen to present what they called a vision for democratic monarchy. Professor Martinez was a respected political scientist who had spent years studying successful transitions of power around the world, and her group included economists, social workers, educators, and community leaders who had developed a comprehensive plan for royal reform. Against the strong objections of her traditional advisors, Queen Victoria had agreed to the meeting. She had been deeply moved by Professor Martinez's presentation, which outlined specific ways the monarchy could maintain its cultural significance while dramatically increasing its relevance to citizens' daily lives. The plan included proposals for using royal resources to fund public services, for opening palace grounds as community spaces, and for transforming royal duties to focus on solving real problems rather than maintaining ceremonies. The most revolutionary aspect of the proposal was the suggestion that the Queen voluntarily reduce her own power and wealth in order to demonstrate genuine commitment to her people's welfare. Professor Martinez had presented research showing that monarchies around the world were becoming increasingly unpopular unless they could prove their value to modern society. The choice, she argued, was between voluntary reform and eventual forced abdication. As Queen Victoria reflected on that meeting during the final hours of 2025, she realized that Professor Martinez and her colleagues were offering her an opportunity rather than presenting demands. They were giving her the chance to become the monarch who saved the institution by transforming it, rather than the one who lost it by refusing to change. The Queen's decision to embrace radical reform didn't come easily. She had been raised to believe that royal tradition was sacred and that her primary duty was to preserve the monarchy for future generations. However, she had also been taught that a queen's ultimate responsibility was to serve her people, and she had become convinced that traditional royal approaches were no longer serving anyone effectively. The first indication that Queen Victoria was seriously considering major changes came when she requested detailed financial reports about royal expenditures and assets. The numbers were staggering. The royal family's annual budget exceeded the GDP of some small countries, while citizens struggled with basic needs. The Queen realized that she couldn't justify this level of expenditure when her people were facing genuine hardship. Working with a small team of trusted advisors, Queen Victoria began developing what would later be called the New Royal Covenant, a complete reimagining of what monarchy could be in the 21st century. The plan was ambitious and unprecedented, involving voluntary reductions in royal privileges, massive financial contributions to public welfare, and fundamental changes to how royal duties were defined and executed. The announcement came in a televised address on New Year's Day, 2026. Queen Victoria appeared not in traditional royal regalia, but in a simple dress, speaking directly to her people from a modest room in the palace rather than from the ornate throne room. Her words would later be recognized as one of the most important speeches in modern royal history. "My dear people," the Queen began, "I speak to you today not as someone who inherited a title, but as someone who has earned the right to serve you through a lifetime of learning about your needs, your struggles, and your hopes for the future. The monarchy as it has existed for centuries is no longer serving you as it should, and I take full responsibility for allowing that situation to continue." The Queen's speech outlined specific, measurable changes that would take effect immediately. She announced that 75% of royal wealth would be transferred to a public trust dedicated to affordable housing, education, and healthcare. Palace grounds would be converted into public parks and community centers. Royal staff would be retrained to work on community development projects. Most dramatically, the Queen announced that she would voluntarily limit her own salary to match that of other public servants and would submit to regular performance reviews conducted by citizen committees. The public reaction to the Queen's announcement was unlike anything anyone had anticipated. Instead of skepticism or disbelief, there was an overwhelming outpouring of support and admiration. Citizens who had been protesting royal excess just days before were now praising their Queen's courage and wisdom. Social media exploded with messages of support, using hashtags like #QueenOfThePeople and #RoyalRevolution. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but the changes began immediately and were visible to everyone. Within the first week of 2026, construction crews were already working to convert portions of the palace into community spaces. The Queen herself was seen working alongside volunteers to help families move into newly available affordable housing units that had been funded by royal assets. Perhaps the most powerful symbol of the changes was the Queen's decision to hold her first royal office hours, regular sessions where any citizen could meet with her to discuss community needs and propose solutions to local problems. The first session, held in a converted palace conference room, was attended by single mothers discussing childcare needs, students talking about education funding, and elderly citizens sharing concerns about healthcare access. The economic impact of the royal reforms was immediate and substantial. The transfer of royal wealth to public programs provided funding for initiatives that had been stalled for years due to budget constraints. New affordable housing projects began construction across the kingdom. University education became accessible to thousands of students who previously couldn't afford it. Healthcare services expanded to reach underserved communities. International reaction to Queen Victoria's voluntary revolution was mixed but largely admiring. Some traditional monarchists criticized her for abandoning centuries of royal protocol, but many world leaders praised her innovation and courage. The Queen received invitations to speak at international conferences about democratic governance and social innovation, positioning her kingdom as a leader in progressive policy development. The changes also had unexpected cultural benefits. As the royal family became more accessible and relevant to daily life, citizens developed a deeper appreciation for their history and traditions. Royal events became genuine community celebrations rather than exclusive ceremonies. The monarchy gained rather than lost respect by proving its relevance to modern society. Queen Victoria's personal transformation was as dramatic as the institutional changes she implemented. She enrolled in continuing education courses to better understand economics, social policy, and community development. She spent time working directly with social service organizations to gain practical experience in addressing poverty and inequality. She became not just a ceremonial leader but an active participant in improving her kingdom. The success of the royal revolution attracted attention from other countries facing similar challenges with outdated institutions. Delegations of government officials, academics, and social activists visited the kingdom to study the reforms and consider how similar approaches might work in their own societies. Queen Victoria found herself inadvertently leading an international movement toward more responsive and accountable governance. 1 year later, the results spoke for themselves. Unemployment had dropped to 8%. Housing affordability had improved dramatically. Public satisfaction with government performance reached historic highs. Most importantly, citizens felt that they had a voice in their own governance and that their welfare was genuinely prioritized by their leaders. The Queen's annual address at the end of 2026 reflected on the remarkable transformation that had taken place. She spoke about discovering that true royal power comes not from wealth or privilege but from the trust and support of citizens who believe their leaders are working sincerely on their behalf. She announced plans to continue expanding democratic participation in royal decision-making and to share the kingdom's experience with other countries seeking to modernize their institutions. The revolution that changed everything proved that dramatic institutional reform is possible when leaders have the courage to put public welfare ahead of personal privilege. Queen Victoria's voluntary transformation of the monarchy created a new model for leadership that inspired similar changes around the world and demonstrated that even the most traditional institutions can evolve to meet contemporary needs. The story that began with the Queen facing an impossible choice ended with the creation of a new form of governance that combined the cultural value of monarchy with the practical benefits of democratic accountability. Queen Victoria had saved the crown by sharing it with her people, proving that true leadership means empowering others rather than preserving power for oneself. The kingdom entered 2027 as a changed nation, more prosperous, more equitable, and more hopeful than it had been in generations. The royal revolution had succeeded not by destroying tradition but by showing how tradition could evolve to serve justice, compassion, and genuine progress. Queen Victoria had become not just a monarch but a symbol of what was possible when leaders chose courage over comfort and service over self-interest. The revolution that changed everything ultimately demonstrated that the most powerful transformations are those that come from within, led by individuals willing to sacrifice personal benefit for collective good. Queen Victoria's legacy would be not the preservation of an outdated system but the creation of something entirely new, a form of leadership that proved tradition and progress could work together to create a better future for everyone.